I have kept the Duke of Mourncross's accounts for 11 years. I have watched him sign death warrants for unprofitable estates, dissolve 3 business alliances before the ink dried, and refuse an earl's daughter without the courtesy of a full sentence. I say this so you understand what I mean when I tell you that the morning he offered Wren Ashby 1 year of his name, I was not surprised. And the morning, 12 months later, that I found the contract in the grate, curled and black at the edges, every clause burned clean, I was not surprised by that either. I simply knew, standing in the cold ash of that study, that I had watched the most exacting men in England undone, quietly and completely, by a woman who never once asked him for anything more than he had promised. I will tell it plainly. That is what he would want. Her father was a country solicitor named Ashby, and he had made the particular mistake of guaranteeing another man's debt with his own property. When the other man's creditors came calling, there was nothing left to guarantee. The estate at Renfield, a modest thing, 24 acres and a house that needed its roof red hatching, stood against a sum that Ashby could not produce. The Duke of Mourncross, Evander Crail, held the note. He was 39. He had been meaning, in a vague administrative way, to produce an heir for 4 years. He had not found anyone who could endure his household, or perhaps no one had found him endurable for long enough. When his steward mentioned the Ashby matter, he was reading a grain inventory. He did not look up. He said, "Bring the daughter." I arranged the meeting. She arrived on a Tuesday in November, in a gray wool traveling coat that had been mended at both cuffs. She was 24. She had her father's long hands and a quality of stillness about her that I could not immediately name, not timidity, not performance, not patience exactly. She sat in the receiving chair across from his desk as though she had every right to be there, which, I thought, she did not yet know she had. He made the offer without preamble. 1 year as his legal wife. The house at Renfield released from debt on the wedding morning. Her father to keep his practice and his name. A settled annual income for her, in perpetuity, should the arrangement conclude as designed at year's end. An heir was hoped for but not contractually required. He was, he said, a reasonable man. She would have her own rooms, her own household authority for the duration, and his guarantee that she would not be humiliated in company. He slid the contract across the desk. She read it. All of it. He watched her read it, which most people never did. They took his word. She read to the 3rd page, found the clause about the separation settlement, and looked up. "You've written that I may not remarry within 2 years of the dissolution," she said. "Standard provision." "Not in my interest," she said. "Amend it to 6 months and I'll sign." There was a silence in that room unlike any silence I had heard in 11 years of his service. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he uncapped the pen, crossed out 2 years, and wrote 6 months in his own hand, and annealed it. "Done," he said. She signed. She did not cry. She asked when the marriage would take place, confirmed that the Renfield deed would be transferred on the morning of the ceremony, thanked him without warmth or coldness, and left. He watched the door close. Then he went back to his grain inventory. I noted the date in my ledger, the 3rd of November. I wrote, "Bargain struck. 12 months to run." They were married quietly on the 8th, with myself and the housekeeper, Mrs. Gabb, as witnesses. There was no breakfast. She moved into the east wing that afternoon, and I watched 2 trunks carried up the stairs, 2 trunks for a year of her life, and thought that she had calculated the arrangement with more precision than most people brought to anything. The first weeks were a model of the contract's terms. She ran the household accounts with a thoroughness that Mrs. Gabb told me, in a tone of quiet reverence, she had never seen in 20 years of service. The larder lists were reorganized. 3 subscriptions that had been quietly billing the estate for periodicals no one read were cancelled. The Duke noticed the accounts. He did not say so. He began, without comment, to leave books from his library on the small table outside her sitting room, first a volume on estate management, which she returned with several passages annotated, then a natural history, then a collected letters of a minor philosopher whose name I shall not reproduce here. She returned each one. She never asked him for them. He never admitted to leaving them. In January she found an error in the quarterly accounts I had prepared, a transposed figure that had skewed the Eastern tenants' rent assessment by 14 shillings a household for the better part of 2 years. She brought it to his study herself and laid the corrected sheet on his desk without fanfare. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You've done this before," he said. It was not a question. "My father's accounts," she said. "Since I was 16. He said nothing more. But the following week, without any discussion that I was party to, a second set of keys to the estate records room appeared on her desk. December became January. January became February. The house settled into a rhythm I did not have a word for, not warmth exactly, not ease, but something load-bearing, the way good stone is load-bearing. He came to dinner. She was already there. They spoke about the tenants, the roof on the south cottage that wanted seeing to, the question of the East Meadows drainage. One evening I passed the dining room at 9:30 and they were still at the table, the dishes long cleared, talking about something I could not hear clearly. She was saying a name I didn't recognize. He was leaning slightly forward in his chair, and there was a quality to the room, to the candles burning low, that made me feel I had walked past something private. I kept walking. In March she became ill, a winter chest cold that kept her in bed for 11 days. He did not visit her rooms, the contract's terms were clear about separate quarters and he was a man who kept to his word. But I noted that his study hours shortened. That he appeared in the corridor outside her wing twice each day, not entering, simply standing for a moment before moving on. That when the physician came, the Duke was waiting in the hall downstairs before the man's carriage had fully stopped, and that he read every word of the written report himself rather than having me summarize it. She recovered. The first morning she came down to breakfast, he was already at the table. He looked up from his paper. He said, "You look well." "I am well," she said. "Thank you." They ate in silence. But it was a different silence than November's. In July he asked her, in passing, at the foot of the stairs, what she thought of the proposed enclosure of the North Field. It was the kind of question he had never once asked anyone in my hearing, he decided, and I recorded, and that was the shape of it. She considered the question for a moment, standing with a book under her arm, and then said that she thought enclosure would gain him 30 acres of productive pasture and lose the village its only common grazing land, and that the gain was real but so was the cost, and it depended entirely on which he believed the estate was for. He was silent. 2 days later he told me to leave the North Field as it was. He did not tell her. But the following Sunday she walked past the North Field on her morning circuit of the grounds, and when she came into breakfast she looked at him across the table for a moment before she sat down, a look I could not read except to say that it was not surprise, and he looked back, and then they both looked at their plates, and neither of them said a word about the North Field for the rest of the season. April, May, June, the year was running out. I watched him watch the calendar the way a man watches a road he does not want to reach the end of, steadily and without complaint, because complaint is not in his nature. She, for her part, gave nothing away. She continued the accounts. She continued returning his books. She walked the East Meadow on fine mornings, and once, I saw this from the upper window, he fell into step beside her without announcement, and they walked the full length of the field in conversation before he turned back toward the house. In September, 6 weeks before the contract's term, he called me into the study. "Fen," he said. "The dissolution papers. Have them ready by the 1st of November. "Yes, Your Grace." He said nothing else. I prepared them. The 1st of November arrived. I brought the papers to his desk at 9 in the morning, as instructed. He was standing at the window with his back to me, looking out over the East Meadow. "Leave them," he said, without turning. I left them and went to my own office. At 10:30 I heard him cross the corridor. At 11 I heard the study door. At noon I went back to collect the signed papers for the solicitor. The desk was empty. I looked at the grate. The fire had been low all morning, there had been no call for it, but it had been enough. The papers were ash. The original contract, which he had retrieved from the strongbox himself, was ash alongside them. I stood there for a moment with the coal smell in the room and the gray flakes settling. I thought of the 3rd of November last year. Bargain struck. 12 months to run. And then I thought that I had been wrong in my ledger. The bargain, it turned out, had not run in the direction any of us assumed. I went back to my office. I wrote nothing in the ledger. At dawn the next morning, the 2nd of November, I was in the corridor outside the records room when I heard him knock on the door of the east wing. Not loudly. Once. She opened it. I could not see her face from where I stood, only the edge of the doorframe and the gray early light from the window at the end of the hall. He said, "I burned the contract." A pause. "I know," she said. "I could smell the smoke last night." "I need you to understand what that means," he said. "Because I am not good at saying things I haven't prepared. I have prepared this. I have prepared it since March, and I have not said it because it is outside the terms of what we agreed, and I have never broken my word on the terms of an agreement in my life. But the terms are gone now. I burned them. And so..." Another pause. Longer. "And so," she said. Quietly. She did not fill his silences the way most people did, and I had come to understand that this was not indifference, it was a kind of respect, a willingness to let him finish his own thought without rushing him to the door. "I should like you to stay," he said. "Not on any terms. No contract. No clause about remarriage. No settlement date. I should like you to stay because the house has not made sense since November of last year without you in it, and I did not know a house could make sense before that, and I find I am not willing to go back to not knowing." The silence that followed was the longest I had ever stood inside. "You left the natural history outside my door in December," she said at last. "Yes. You had underlined the passage about migratory birds. The one about returning to the same ground." He said nothing. "I thought," she said, "that you might be telling me something. I told myself I was wrong." A breath. "I was not wrong, was I?" "No," he said. "You were not." There was a sound. I could not have said what it was, only that it was not a door closing, and that I turned and walked very quietly back down the corridor toward the stairs, because what came next belonged entirely to them. I know only what he told me, 2 days later, when he came to my office and said, with the same directness he brought to grain inventories and rent assessments and the dissolution of unprofitable alliances, that the dissolution papers would not be required after all, and that he would need me to arrange a new entry in the estate records. Not a contract. Simply a record. Evander Crail, Duke of Mourncross. And beside his name, in the column that had been blank for 39 years, his wife. Permanent. He said it was her idea to keep the record simple. He said she told him that a thing is not made more real by the length of its documentation. I wrote it in the ledger. Then I went back and crossed out the line I had written 12 months before, bargain struck. 12 months to run, and wrote beside it, in the margin, in smaller letters than my usual hand, it ran considerably longer than that.